Okay, so I'm going to share my screen with you, and we are going to get started. All right, so one of the things that you may have noticed I've been doing here on YouTube is I've been providing practice dictations that you can do every day. Now, the thing about these dictations is that they're very simple dictations. If you're struggling with them, that's great. They're going to provide a huge benefit for you. But if they're easy, I want to kind of give you a technique you can use to try and make these just a little bit more useful for your own practice and your own audiation technique. So we're going to talk about that today, and I'm going to show you a technique that you can use to actually start to use these dictations in kind of a different way. So you can visit my YouTube channel and you can complete the practice dictations that are available there. These dictations, as I said, they start very easy and they gradually become more difficult, which makes them perfect for improving your audiation skills, because these are going to start with a single line like what you see here. This is actually the first dictation, so just see if you can memorize it, and then when you hear it, maybe you'll be able to notate it perfectly the first time. But here's our dictation. I'm going to play it for you. So that's a pretty simple dictation, but we can do a lot with that to actually start to improve our audiation skills, because the way this works is we're starting with these one-line dictations using just half notes, whole notes, and quarter notes, and then eventually we're going to add 2 lines, we're going to increase the rhythmic complexity, we're going to go through every single key, and there are going to be hundreds of these dictations most likely when this thing is complete. And this is sort of my solution to that issue in audiation, where a lot of you can hear something internally. You can close your eyes and you can hear a melody. But if there's more than one melody going on at the same time, or you have harmony, all of a sudden you have trouble breaking it apart and you have trouble actually hearing what the melody consists of. So what we're trying to do here with these dictations, taking it to the next level, is we're slowly building your ability to audiate and hear these multiple independent lines and to start to hear harmony more clearly. And if you follow this process, which I'm going to expand upon in later audiation courses, we're going to make this a little more difficult, and I'm going to show you some more techniques you can do. But if you start with this basic primer, you can actually go very far with these dictations. So the first thing you want to do is just start with the first dictation, no matter how easy it is, and just follow the process where you notate it, you identify the rhythm first, and you follow the process that I give you in the actual video demonstrations for these. So one of the things you want to be careful with is, as you complete each dictation, you want to make sure that you notate it very accurately. So you want to make sure you're getting them correct. Don't use notation software program, write it out by hand, because what you'll find is when you write out these dictations by hand, you're actually connecting with the notes you're putting on the page. So you'll hear me play a dictation, and then as you actually write each note out, if you're not doing this, most of you will probably do this naturally, but if you're not hearing the note as you write it on the page, as you notate it, then you're missing a crucial aspect of the training, because you want to connect what you're hearing with what you're writing. And most of us, when we start to notate things, especially if we're familiar with the melody, we will naturally hear what we're writing as we write it. The other thing about notating your dictations is it's going to help you visualize the music, because when you connect those notes to the written page, it just reinforces your understanding of the rhythms and the pitches that you're actually writing. So that's the first thing I recommend is, make sure you notate them, make sure you get them accurate. If you complete, let's say, dictation 1, and you see the answer and you didn't get what you see right here on the screen in front of you, then what you'll want to do is make sure that you correct it, and then make sure that you sing it through. Make sure that you understand where you made a mistake. Remember, I always say this, but The ear training comes not in just going through the drills passively. It comes when you actually have to go through and edit what you've written and fix your mistakes. So once you've notated the dictation, this is where we want to audiate it from memory. So you close your eyes and you try and remember the melody. If you haven't memorized it yet, you'd want to take some time to go ahead and memorize that melody first. So this melody here, why don't we just try that real quick? I'm going to play this for you again. Right now you can close your eyes and just mentally listen to the melody that I'm playing, and then I'm going to give you a few more seconds to try and play it through in your mind. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm going to audiate. Just close your eyes and try and audiate it now. 1, 2, ready, go. Okay, that should have been enough time to audiate it. So now what you do at this point is you take another few seconds. You pause the video when I tell you to audiate it. And you try and feel the texture of that melody. Like each note. That C, that D. There's a texture. There's a texture in relation to the tonic. So we hear things in relation to the key. And when we're in C major, for example, a C has a certain quality and a D has a certain quality in relation to C. So we can start to learn to recognize these scale degrees. But we want to try and hear whatever we can in each one of these notes, and we want to try and visualize the texture along with the actual pitches. We're not just trying to notate pitches. If every note sounds exactly the same to you, then you want to take a little more time and you want to just listen to the playback of this melody, and you want to audiate it, and you want to keep trying to hear more and more into the individual pitches that are actually being played in the dictation. Because an A in relation to C, it kind of has a different texture. A G, that also has a texture. The A feels brighter. I don't know how many of you can hear that, but the A feels brighter in relation to the C. The G feels a little softer in relation to the C. The E, that also has an edginess compared to the C. So when I say texture, that's what I'm having you look for. You want to listen for these textures that exist within each note. Now what this does is when you audiate that and you're able to audiate those textures along with the melody, then that can help you develop your ear even further. So this is what I mean, that these dictations are very simple, but obviously depending on the process you use, there's a lot in there. There's a lot of stuff that you can gain from a simple 4-measure dictation. And now imagine if you start with these 4-measure dictations, and this one's actually 5, and eventually you're dictating 4-part harmony, and you're hearing this texture, this idea that I'm talking about with texture and how the melody sounds and feels, and you're hearing it with 4-part harmony. That's when you know that you've reached like a really exciting point in your musical development. There was a comment, so I'm going to go ahead and read this comment. It might also help with audiation if they can memorize what scales sound like, and that way they can at least know where the scale degree is for a melody. Or yeah, that's absolutely true. And so that's why, audiation, I'm going to take a moment to talk about that for a minute. Audiation and ear training are different. What we're doing here with these dictations is we're combining audiation and ear training, because you're audiating, which requires no knowledge of music. It just requires the ability to memorize what something sounds like and play it back in the head, in your mind. And then there's ear training, which allows you to say, okay, that was a C, a D, an E, and an F. I knew those notes, now I can notate them on the page. So ear training gives you the information to work with your audiation, to actually extract it and put it on the page. So that's why you need to be going along with an ear training course. I mean, you can do the flawless course, you can do any other course that you like. It doesn't matter what ear training course you do in some ways, but you want to have an ear training course that is teaching you to notate your ideas and teaching you what different intervals sounds like, what different scales sound like, what different chords sound like. So yeah, that's a very good question and a very good point. Practicing your scales will help, and I integrate that into any of the ear training programs that I use as well. All right, so moving on. This is another thing that I'd like you to do. So once you have heard the melody play, you want to go ahead and start a metronome. First, you should try and figure out the tempo that was used in the dictation. This is actually a real life musical skill. So if we hear, then you go to your metronome, that was pretty close. And we find, okay, that was about 72 beats per minute. So you want to try and narrow down the actual tempo that was used, because now you're being very specific about your audiation. One of the things about audiation is that it is not just hearing things back, it's understanding what you're hearing in as much detail as possible. And one of those details is the tempo. So the first thing you try and do is you figure out the actual tempo. You just make a note to yourself, okay, that was quarter note equals 72 or close to it. And then you write on top of your score, okay, this dictation, you write a little quarter note equals 72 to indicate you figured out what the tempo was. Then what you do, even though this is easy for a lot of you, you start your metronome. So let's go ahead and start that there. Give yourself about 4 beats, and then you clap it. And you go straight through, and you'll notice the metronome likes to speed up and slow down sometimes when you're notating your rhythms. So even if you think you have really good rhythm, you know, obviously that was a joke, the metronome is not speeding up or slowing down, you have not solidified your internal rhythm yet. And so you do want to practice with the metronome to help improve your ability to clap in time, because anytime you get more precise, it sort of locks in all the other ear training. All these things, they come together at some point to become a complete ear training technique. The other thing is when you tap the rhythm and don't worry about the pitch, it helps you to internalize the timing and improves your rhythmic accuracy. So that's really important. You can also start with a slow tempo, or whatever tempo that I play this dictation at, and then gradually increase the speed. So if you start at 72 beats per minute, and then you take it up to 82, and then 86, and then maybe 92, 98, whatever tempo you want to keep increasing it to, there'll be a point where you can't clap it at that pace anymore. And that's where you stop. And then the next day you come back and you see if you can go a little faster than 96 or whatever tempo you ended on. And this will help internalize rhythm. Even though we're using our hands to clap or our feet, I mean, it doesn't really matter what you use to clap, as long as you're clapping in time. As you do this, you will gradually increase your internal clock as well. And so that'll become more accurate. And one of the biggest things about audiation is, what meter am I in? What is the best way to notate this idea? And if you don't have a very solid internal metronome, then you're not going to be able to figure out that, okay, actually that was a 7/8 bar and I thought it was a 4/4. They can be subtly different, especially if you're articulating it somewhat like you might articulate in 4/4. So developing this internal rhythm that's very precise can help you a lot with audiation, and it's really important. So that's another exercise you do. You first audiate, and then you tap the rhythm with a metronome. And now we're getting kind of towards the end to it. So one of the things about audiation and anything in general, ear training, I mean, if you're trying to do perfect pitch training, one of the recommendations is often to try and hear the notes on your own instrument first because you're most familiar with it. The same is true for audiation. So once you've heard me perform it and you've notated it, you want to try and play the melody on your own instrument. This helps to connect that whole visual aspect of the notation with that physical act of playing. So that's going to be really important. After you've played it on your instrument, you can try and listen to the melody on other instruments. So when I say listen, I really mean audiate. So you sit there, you close your eyes, maybe you listen to a piano recording, and then you try and emulate the sound of that piano after listening to the piano recording. And then maybe you listen to an oboe solo, and you say, okay, now I'm going to hear it as an oboe. And then maybe a French horn. You listen to a French horn play a solo piece for a little bit, and then you try and emulate that sound of the French horn. anything that you're doing where you are trying to hear these instruments' timbres, that's the color of their sound, right, will help improve your audiation. So if you improve your rhythm, then when you audiate, you improve your audiation. If you improve your ability to notate, then when you audiate, you improve your ability to actually understand what you're hearing. If you improve your ability to hear timbre, then that is also going to help you overall with your audiation. So all these things, they kind of come together. And what's interesting about them is you'd think that rhythm, timbre, tempo, things like this, maybe they're somewhat related, especially rhythm and tempo, they're pretty closely related. But you may think that they're not going to help with your overall skill, but they do. When you build a foundation that includes many aspects of music and you roll it all into one, then it starts to make your power of audiation stronger. It's a natural thing. The more details you hear in music, if you hear dynamics, if you hear articulation, staccato, slurs, ties, things like this, then it increases your overall level and ability to audiate. So one of the things I recommend here, and you don't have to do this with every single melody because that would just take you forever, but you can follow what we call score order. And so I'm not going to recommend orchestral score order to go through the instruments you're unfamiliar with. So you start with flute, and then you'd go to the next one, and I'm going to show you the score order. And you try and hear maybe flute on Monday, maybe an oboe on Tuesday, on Wednesday maybe you go down to the clarinet. And you just try and hear one instrument per day with whatever melody you're working on, so that you're constantly going through different instrumentations. And then when you get to 2-part, you try and hear 2 different instruments. And then 3-part, you listen for 3. So this is something else that can help you to start to hear timbre more. So this is score order. This is your typical score order. Typically when you write an orchestra score, what that means is you'll place the piccolo first on the score, the flute will be next, and oboe, English horn, clarinet, bassoon, contrabassoon. Then you have horn, trumpet, trombone, and tuba, and then you have your strings. And you can also have some percussion in there. But we tend to want to write instruments in a particular location that's very predictable for conductors, and so there is a standard score order. For audiation, this is what I recommend. If you want to try and do percussion instruments like a marimba, a timpani, even a bass drum when you're doing the rhythm, you can do that too. That's also helpful. But this is kind of your standard. Now, piccolo and flute, I mean, this is going to upset some piccolo players out there, but you could just, I'm just going to say, you could just audiate the flute if you want to, because the piccolo is a very strong sound. It's a very penetrating sound, and it may not be something that you want to start your audiation journey with. Maybe do the flute first and then work into the piccolo. Piccolos are really good though for bringing out particular high points in a melody and really cutting through the orchestra. So they're valuable instruments, but to audiate, they're just such a high-end instrument, the high end of the spectrum in terms of pitch, that it may not be the best thing to start with. So I recommend starting with the lower instruments. Like, I mean, the flute can actually play down to a C, and it's a more mellow instrument. Same with the oboe, English horn. So you can just go through these and try and hear each individual timbre. And so I hope that was helpful for you. This is one way you can practice these practice dictations. They only last about 3 to 5 minutes, but as you can see, you can do a lot more with them to get a lot more benefit out of them. And this will just help your audiation journey as well. So thank you for tuning in, and hopefully I could do something like this at a later point.